She said it loud enough for the whole street to hear. "That truck belongs in a scrapyard," not whispered, not muttered under her breath the way people mutter things they know they shouldn't say out loud. Said it fully, publicly, with the specific confidence of a woman who has spent 20 years being the smartest person in every room she's entered, and has stopped worrying about what that sounds like to the people around her. The truck was, by any objective measure, a disaster. 1987 Ford F-150. Rust along both rear panels and the particular orange-brown of something that has been losing a war with weather for decades. A crack in the passenger side window that had been there long enough to acquire a strip of electrical tape across it, not as a real fix, clearly, but as an acknowledgement that the crack existed, and someone was aware of it. A dent in the front left fender, with the specific shape of a collision with something low and stationary, a parking barrier, maybe, or someone's mailbox that had never been addressed beyond a philosophy of acceptance. One side mirror, held on with a single remaining bolt, angled slightly downward, reflecting the road rather than anything useful. It was, Victoria Chin decided, the automotive equivalent of giving up. And it was parked directly in front of the house she needed to reach. She said what she said, and the man standing in the driveway work jacket, coffee in hand, the easy posture of someone who had nowhere to be and no reason to hurry, turned around. He looked at her. He looked at the truck. He looked back at her with an expression she would spend a long time thinking about afterward, not offended, not embarrassed, not defensive, somewhere between amused and expectant. The expression of a man who has been waiting for someone to say exactly this. And then he said, with the quietest confidence she had ever heard deployed, "Open the garage door first." She did, and Victoria Chin, CEO of Helix Energy Technologies, runner of a $200 million clean energy research operation, the woman who had been on the cover of 3 industry magazines and had just last month told a Senate subcommittee that residential hydrogen fuel cell technology was still 5 to 7 years from viability, stopped breathing for a moment, because what was inside that garage was going to change everything. Not in 5 to 7 years. Right now. Victoria Chin had been right about most things for most of her life. Not in the arrogant way, or not only in the arrogant way. She had been right the way people are right when they are genuinely, structurally smarter than the problems they're solving, when their instincts have been pressure tested enough times to have earned the confidence they project. She had been right about clean energy being the next major technology frontier in 2008, when everyone she knew was going into finance. She had been right about hydrogen over battery as the long-term residential solution in 2015, when the industry was betting everything on lithium. She had been right about the commercialization timeline in 2019, which had turned out to be wrong, but wrong in the right direction, which she counted. She had started Helix Energy Technologies at 31 with seed funding she'd raised in 11 days. Because when Victoria Chin explained why something was going to happen, people tended to believe her. She was 44 now. Helix had grown from a 4-person operation in a rented lab in Palo Alto to a company with 312 employees, offices in 4 cities, 2 government contracts, and a research and development budget that had, in the past 3 years alone, consumed $206 million in its pursuit of a single goal: a functional, affordable, residential-scale hydrogen fuel cell. Not industrial, not theoretical, not a proof of concept that required a team of PhDs to operate in a warehouse to house. A real one the size of a home appliance, safe enough to install in a residential garage, efficient enough to power a house, and manufacturable at a price point that could eventually compete with the grid. 3 years, $206 million, 41 researchers, engineers, and specialists, including 3 people with doctorates from MIT and one who had previously worked on NASA's fuel cell program for the International Space Station. They hadn't cracked it. They were close. Victoria knew they were close. Could feel the shape of the solution the way she sometimes felt the shape of things before they fully arrived, but close. In technology development is a word that costs money every single day, that it remains true. Clothes had been costing Helix approximately $240,000 per week. Clothes had begun to attract the specific attention of her board of directors that Victoria recognized as the preliminary weather of a coming storm. She had 3 months. That was her private number, not shared with anyone on her team, and certainly not with the board. 3 months before the next funding review, before the questions got harder, before close stopped being an acceptable answer. She had come to this particular suburb of Columbus, Ohio, on a Thursday morning for a client meeting, a municipal utility authority, considering a pilot contract that would, if it came through, buy her 8 more months of runway. The meeting was at 9. She had arrived at 8:50, which was her standard 10 minutes early. Time to orient. Time to be ready before the room filled. She had parked on the street. She had looked at the truck. She had said what she said. And now, she was standing in a driveway in Columbus, Ohio, looking at the inside of a garage. And the 3 months on her private clock had suddenly become the least important number in her life. Marcus Webb was not supposed to be remarkable. He had, with deliberate effort, constructed a life that did not invite that word. He fixed things: appliances, vac systems, plumbing, the occasional electrical problem for the people in his neighborhood and the surrounding 3 zip codes. And he charged reasonable rates and did good work, and came when he said he'd come, which in the home repair industry was, he'd found, already enough to build a reputation. He drove the truck everywhere. He did this on purpose. He had a second vehicle, a perfectly functional 2019 Honda Key RV, that he used for Lily's school runs and grocery trips and everything that required reliability and a functional passenger window. The truck was his work vehicle. He had bought it 11 years ago, before everything changed, when he was 29 and working at Boeing's Advanced Systems Division in Seattle, and making the kind of salary that meant he could buy a truck for its character rather than its practicality. He kept it because it was honest. That was the word he used when people asked. And people asked frequently because the truck was the kind of vehicle that generated questions. It was honest. It looked exactly like what it was: old, used, imperfect, still working. He had grown up in environments that rewarded the opposite of that. Environments where what things looked like was considered more important than what they were. And he had made a choice, some years back, to be done with that. He was 41 years old. He had grown up in Columbus, gone to Ohio State on a full engineering scholarship, then to MIT for his master's in aerospace engineering, where he had graduated second in his cohort and been recruited by 4 companies before he finished his thesis. He had chosen Boeing because they were doing the most interesting work, and interesting was the thing Marcus Webb had always organized his life around. He had worked in Boeing's Advanced Propulsion Systems Division for 8 years. Good years, genuinely good. The kind that compound on themselves, where each problem is larger and more interesting than the last, and you go home tired in a way that feels like satisfaction. He had worked on fuel cell integration for high-altitude unmanned systems. He had led a team that solved a pressure regulation problem that had been blocking a classified program for 2 years. He had been promoted twice in 5 years, and was, by 34, one of the youngest senior engineers in his division, and considered, by the people who tracked such things internally, a likely candidate for the director track. Then Diane died. It was a Tuesday. Lily was 3. The diagnosis had been fast aggressive, uninterested in the various things medicine tried, and the 9 months between the diagnosis and the Tuesday were the 9 months that rewrote everything Marcus thought he knew about what mattered and what didn't. He left Boeing 6 weeks after the funeral, not in grief, or not only in grief, in clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after the worst thing happens and the noise falls away, and you can hear, for the first time in years, what you actually believe. He believed that Lily needed him. Fully. Physically. Actually present, not half present. Not video calling from a hotel in Everett. Not making it to the school play when the project schedule allowed. He believed that he had been measuring his life in the wrong units. He moved back to Columbus. He bought the house. He set up the handyman business because it let him set his own hours. Be home when Lily got home. Coach her soccer team on Saturdays. And be, every day, the most important thing he had decided to be. And he built things in the garage. Not because he needed to. Not for money. Not for recognition. Not to prove anything to anyone. He built things because he was Marcus Webb. And Marcus Webb's mind, when given idle time, began solving problems the way other people's minds drift to music or memory. He couldn't turn it off. He didn't want to, so he built things carefully, methodically, over long evenings after Lily was asleep, with salvaged parts, and his own hands, and the same focused intelligence that had made him exceptional at bowing, now pointed at problems of his own choosing. 14 months ago, he had started on the fuel cell. Not because he had a business plan. Not because he was trying to commercialize it. He had started because he had read an article about the state of residential hydrogen fuel cell research, a long, technical piece in an engineering journal, and had identified, while reading it, what he believed was the core mistake everyone was making. A fundamental assumption baked into every major research approach that was, in his assessment, wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong in the way that sends you in a direction that gets harder and harder and never quite arrives, because the destination doesn't exist in that direction. He had thought about it for a week. Then he had gone to the garage. What he had built, the thing that Victoria Chin was now looking at, that had stopped her breathing, was not large. That was the first thing that surprised her. She had expected something that filled the space the way laboratory equipment fills space, imposing, complex, institutional. What she was looking at was approximately the size of a chest freezer. It was not beautiful. It was built the way things built by one person in a garage are built, with the materials available, optimized for function rather than form. The welds visible. The housing clearly fabricated rather than manufactured. Cables running in routes determined by logic rather than aesthetics. A label maker had been used to identify components in Marcus Webb's small, precise handwriting. Two of the parts had clearly been sourced from entirely unrelated industrial equipment. She could see a pressure valve that she was fairly certain had originated in a commercial dishwasher, and a heat exchanger that looked like it might have come from an automotive application. It was, by the standards of a $300 million research operation, a complete mess. It was also, by the evidence of the monitoring system she could see running on a laptop balanced on a folding table beside it, fully operational. Not prototype operational. Not this version demonstrates the principle operational. Working, producing output. Stable readings across every parameter she could see on the screen: fuel flow, membrane efficiency, thermal management, output voltage, all of it sitting exactly where it needed to sit, not spiking, not compensating, just running. She turned to Marcus. "How long has it been running?" she said. Her voice was different from the voice that had said the thing about the truck. She didn't notice this yet. "Continuously?" Marcus considered. 63 days. I took it offline for 4 hours in September to replace a membrane gasket. That's the only interruption. 63 days of continuous operation. Had residential load simulation. I have it running the house, the garage." And he nodded at a second, smaller unit on the opposite wall that she hadn't noticed. That's the version 2 prototype. Different membrane configuration. "I started it 8 days ago." Victoria looked at the second unit. She looked at the first. She looked at Marcus. What efficiency rating? The first unit is running at 61%. Version 2 is at 68, and climbing I think it'll stabilize around 72. Victoria knew the numbers. Her best research result, the one her team had celebrated in July. The one Gerald Park had written 3 pages about in the board update was 54%, achieved once, under controlled laboratory conditions, for 45 minutes, before the thermal management system had failed and the test had to be aborted. 68%. 63 days of continuous operation. In a garage, next to a rusty truck. She put her hand on the door frame, not for support. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed door frames for support. Just to have something solid under her hand while her mind did what it was doing, which was the rapid, total restructuring of a problem she had thought she understood. "What did you solve?" she said quietly. "What's the thing everyone else is missing?" Marcus looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he smiled. He made coffee. This was not what she expected. She had a client meeting in 9 minutes. She was aware of this and simultaneously aware that the client meeting had become the least important thing scheduled for this day. She followed Marcus into the kitchen and sat at a table that had a drawing of a horse on it, Lily's, clearly. A 7-year-old's confident horse with an oversized head and an expression of tremendous satisfaction, and accepted the coffee and waited. Marcus sat across from her with his own cup and said, "Everyone is trying to solve the thermal management problem, because the thermal management problem is the problem," Victoria said. "The membrane degradation under operational heat is why nobody can get past 55% efficiency for sustained periods." "Right," Marcus said. "Everyone sees the membrane degrading, and they say thermal management problem. So they build more sophisticated cooling systems, more complex heat exchangers, more precise temperature regulation, and every time they make the cooling system more complex, the efficiency gain from better thermal management gets eaten by the energy cost of running the more complex cooling system. So, the net efficiency barely moves." He paused. "It's a treadmill. The faster you run, the faster it goes." Victoria had heard versions of this critique before. The alternative approaches have all started from the same assumption, Marcus said, that the membrane is a fixed variable, that the membrane is what it is, and the system has to manage around it. He looked at her. "What if the membrane is the wrong membrane?" Victoria was quiet. "The current research consensus," Marcus continued, "uses a perfluorosulfonic acid membrane Nafion-based, with various modifications depending on the team. It became the standard in the 90s. It's good. It works. Everyone knows how to work with it, but it has a thermal tolerance ceiling, and every approach to residential scale fuel cells is running into that ceiling. And the response has been to try to stay below the ceiling, instead of asking whether the ceiling is negotiable. The alternative membrane materials have been tested," Victoria said. "Polybenzimidazole, hydrocarbon membranes, the efficiency under low-temperature operation is worse," Marcus said. "Yes, under the standard operating parameters, they underperform. But," he stood up. "Come back to the garage." He showed her. Not the unit itself, she'd seen the unit. He showed her the membrane assembly, removed from the version 2 prototype, and laid on a workbench with the care of someone who has spent a long time with something and knows exactly how it works. He showed her the modification, not a different membrane entirely, but a hybrid configuration, a specific layering approach that he had derived from work done on high-altitude aerospace fuel systems. Systems that operated in temperature ranges that were wildly different from residential applications, but that had solved, in a different context, a version of the same problem. He had taken a solution from one world and applied it to a problem in another world. That was what it was. He had been able to see it, because he had worked in both worlds: aerospace fuel cell integration at Boeing and the residential energy problem that he'd been reading about for years. He had seen a connection that nobody else had seen, because nobody else had stood in both places at the same time. Victoria looked at the membrane assembly for a long time. She was a woman who understood what she was looking at. That was the specific combination of things that made this moment what it was: not a non-technical person being impressed by something complex, but an expert recognizing the solution to a problem she had spent 3 years and $200 million on, and recognizing it as correct in the specific, unambiguous way that correct solutions announce themselves to people who know what they're looking for. "This is it," she said. Not to him, more to herself, or to the 3 years. "Yeah," Marcus said. She turned to him. "You know what this is worth. I have some idea. Not to me specifically. To the field. To the technology. To the this is a decade of acceleration. The timeline I told the Senate committee last month: 5 to 7 years. This makes that 2, maybe 18 months. "I know," Marcus said. He said it without pride, without performance. As a fact. "Have you filed patents?" Provisional applications on the membrane configuration and the hybrid layering process. Filed 4 months ago. She had thought some part of her had been hoping that she was looking at something unprotected, something she could move on quickly, before he understood the full value of what he had. She recognized this thought for what it was and found it slightly unflattering. "So," she said. "So," Marcus said. "I want to license it." "I know you do. I want to talk numbers." Marcus picked up his coffee. He looked at her over the rim of the cup with the expression she'd seen in the driveway, that amused, expectant, waiting expression. The expression of a man who has been in this conversation before, in his head, and knows how it goes. "You should know something first," he said. "What?" "I'm not going to sell it to you." The kitchen again. Victoria Chen sat across from Marcus Webb and looked at him with the specific expression of a person encountering an unexpected wall. She was not a woman who encountered unexpected walls often. She had negotiated with senators. She had negotiated with sovereign wealth funds. She had been in a room with a venture capital firm that had offered her $50 million and told them the valuation was wrong, and walked out. And been right, and had them call her back in 3 days with the right number. She was one of the best negotiators in her industry. She was beginning to understand. Talking to someone who was not negotiating. "You're not going to sell it," she said. "No, it's worth." She did the calculation, quickly, conservatively, licensed appropriately. With the right commercialization agreement, you are looking at north of $80 million over the first 5 years of production. That's conservative. If the technology performs at scale the way it performs here, and I believe it will, we're talking about potentially 3 times that. "I know," Marcus said. "And you're not going to sell it." "I'm not going to sell it." She looked at him. He looked back. In the silence, she could hear the house, the particular quiet of a house that has a child in it, when the child is not present. A furnished quiet, the quiet of a space organized around someone small and important. "Why?" she said. Marcus put his cup down. "Because of what you'll do with it," he said. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. She was a careful enough thinker to recognize that she was about to say something defensive, a reflex to an accusation she hadn't fully understood yet, and she stopped herself. "Explain that," she said instead. Marcus looked at the drawing of the horse on the table. He was quiet for a moment, not collecting himself. He was already collected, but giving the answer the space to be said correctly. "If I license this technology to Helix," he said, "you will build a product. You'll do it fast because you have to. Your funding situation is not a secret. The industry trade press has been covering it for 6 months. You'll build a product fast, and you'll price it for the market that makes your investors happy. which is the market that can afford the early adoption premium, which is the top 15% of households by income, maybe the top 10. He paused, and then you'll spend the next decade slowly bringing the price down, while the bottom 90% of households, the people who actually need the energy, cost relief the most. The people who have been paying the highest percentage of their income on utilities for the entire time your company has existed continue to pay what they've been paying, because the economics of your commercialization approach don't reach them for a decade, maybe longer. Victoria said, that's how technology adoption works. It's how every technology works when it's owned by people who need to generate returns for investors, Marcus said. I know that. I'm not criticizing you for it. I'm telling you it's why I'm not selling to you. Then what? Victoria stopped. She recalibrated. What do you want? Marcus looked at her. Lily was 7 last month, he said. Victoria waited. Diane, her mother, grew up in a house where the utilities were the thing the family budgeted around. Not the thing they paid and moved on from. The thing they managed. Hot water on a schedule. The heat lower than comfortable, because comfortable was money. She grew up understanding that energy was not a given. That for some families it's a calculation, every month, and the calculation sometimes doesn't come out right. He paused. I built this in a garage with salvaged parts, because I wanted to prove it could be done without $200 million. Because the proof matters. Because if the solution requires $200 million to develop and 20 years to reach the people who need it most, then the solution is not actually for them. Victoria was very still. I don't want to sell this technology to a company whose primary accountability is to its investors, Marcus said. That's not a judgment. It's a structural reality. What I want, he paused, is different. What do you want? Victoria said again. Quieter this time. I want a foundation, Marcus said. Not mine. I don't want to run a foundation. A real one. Independent. Structured so that the technology is licensed to manufacturers, under terms that include affordability requirements. Not suggestions. Requirements, with teeth written into the license. The technology gets used. It gets manufactured. You get a version of what you came here for. But the terms of how it reaches the market are not negotiable. He looked at her. I want it to reach Diane's family, he said. The family she grew up in. Before I'm 60. Is that possible or not? The silence lasted a long time. Victoria Chen was many things. She was driven in the specific way of people who have located a purpose and organized their entire life around it. She was competitive in the way that people who are very good at things become competitive, not meanly, but thoroughly. She was capable of ruthlessness in negotiations, capable of positions that were strategically correct and humanly uncomfortable, capable of the moral compromises that large-scale enterprise requires. She was also, underneath all of it, a person who had gotten into clean energy because she believed it mattered. Not as a talking point, as an actual belief, formed early, held consistently, the thing she came back to on the bad days when the board was difficult and the research wasn't moving, and the question of whether any of it was worth it arose in her at 2 a.m. She had believed it mattered. She had also, in the execution, allowed the structure of how it worked to drift away from why she had started. She sat in Marcus Webb's kitchen with the drawing of the horse on the table and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the specific discomfort of being seen accurately by someone who had no agenda in seeing you. You looked at my company, she said, before today. You knew who I was. I recognized the car, Marcus said. The Helix logo on the license plate frame. I've been following your research publications. Then you know we're close. Our own team is your own team is working from the wrong assumption, Marcus said. Not unkindly. They're going to keep being close for another 2 or 3 years. And then maybe someone at another company will find what I found. And that company will have the same structural incentives yours has. And we'll have the same conversation in a different kitchen. Victoria looked at him. Or, Marcus said, we have the conversation here. She called her chief of staff. She called and said, move the 9 o'clock. Move everything today. Get me Martin on the phone by noon. Martin was Helix's general counsel, the one who had been with her since the beginning, who knew the difference between what was legally possible and what was legally imaginable, and who, in Victoria's experience, was most useful when asked to imagine. She came back to the kitchen. I can't do a foundation, she said. Not structured the way you're describing. The board would never. I'm not asking you to do it, Marcus said. I'm asking you to help structure it. There's a difference. Who funds it? The licensing revenues. The foundation holds the patents. Manufacturers license from the foundation. The licensing fees fund the foundation's operations, and a subsidized unit program the same technology, the same product, manufactured by the same companies, available at subsidized cost to households below a certain income threshold. Victoria ran the numbers in her head. Not precisely, she didn't have enough information for precision, but in the rough shape of things, the way she ran numbers when she was trying to find out if a structure was possible before deciding whether it was desirable. The manufacturers will resist the affordability requirements, she said. Some of them will. The ones who want access to the technology will accept them. And Helix? She said. Where does Helix sit in this structure? Marcus looked at her. Where do you want to sit? She was quiet for a moment. I want to manufacture, she said. I want to be the first manufacturer. 300 people at my company have spent 3 years on this problem. I want them to be the ones who build it. Then you accept the affordability requirements. We accept the affordability requirements. She paused. And we need exclusivity for the first 18 months, Marcus said. Not longer. 24. 18. After 18 months, other manufacturers can license. You have an 18-month head start and 300 people who've been working on this for 3 years. That's not a disadvantage. Victoria looked at him. There was a quality to negotiating with Marcus Webb that was unlike any negotiation she had been in, which was that he was not trying to win. He was not trying to extract maximum value, was not playing positional games, was not holding things back to trade later. He had come to this conversation knowing what he wanted and why he wanted it, and everything he said was in direct service of that, and the absence of performance in it was disorienting. She was used to people who wanted more than they said. Marcus Webb wanted exactly what he said. The foundation board, she said. Who sits on it? Not me, Marcus said immediately. I'll consult on technical decisions for the first 2 years. After that, I'm done. The board needs people who know how to run a foundation, not me. You trust a board you don't sit on? I trust documents more than people. The legal structure of the licensing requirements doesn't depend on who's on the board. It's written into every license agreement in terms that require renegotiation to change and trigger automatic patent reversion to a designated public interest holder if the terms are violated. He paused. I've had 3 years of evenings to think about this. Victoria looked at the table, at the horse drawing, at the ordinary imperfect surface of a kitchen table in a Columbus, Ohio house where a 41-year-old handyman had spent 3 years of evenings solving a problem that had consumed a $200 million research operation and 3 years of her life. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah, why do you still do the handyman work? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Lily gets home at 3:15, he said. The work lets me be there at 3:15. He looked at her. Also, people's dishwashers break. That's a real problem. She stayed until 2 in the afternoon. They talked through the structure, not negotiating anymore, exactly, but building, sketching the shape of something on a legal pad that Marcus produced from a kitchen drawer, the same legal pad Lily used for homework. her name written in marker on the cover, with a flower drawn beside it. Victoria wrote in her precise hand, and Marcus wrote in his small engineer's print, and occasionally one of them would pause and look at what they'd written, and see a problem, and talk through it until the problem had a shape, and the shape had an address. At 12:30, Martin called. Victoria put him on speaker. She explained the structure. Martin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Is the technology real?" Victoria looked at Marcus. "Come to Columbus," she said. "Bring Henderson." Henderson was Helix's chief technology officer. "I want them to look at it." Another pause. "Victoria," Martin said, "if this is what you're describing, it is. Then the structure he's proposing, the foundation model, it's not unprecedented. There are legal frameworks for this. It's complex. It's going to take months to structure properly." "I know. And the board implications, I'll handle the board." A longer pause. "Okay," Martin said. "I'll be there tomorrow." Victoria hung up. She looked at Marcus. "My CTO will want to spend a week with the unit," she said. "He's going to want full documentation, every design decision, every component source, the membrane configuration specs." "I have documentation," Marcus said. 14 months of it." "Of course you do," Victoria said. Lily Webb came home at 3:17, 2 minutes late, which she explained before she reached the door as being because Zoe had needed help with her backpack zipper. And you can't just leave someone with a stuck backpack zipper, which Marcus accepted as both true and characteristically Lily. She came through the door, saw the stranger at the kitchen table, stopped, looked at Victoria Chin with the direct, unself-conscious assessment of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't evaluating someone. "Are you from the government?" Lily said. Victoria blinked. "No, I'm from a company. My name is Victoria." "What company?" "Helix Energy Technologies." Lily looked at her father. "Is this about the thing in the garage?" she said. "It is," Marcus said. Lily put her backpack down with the care of a child who has been told many times that backpacks go on hooks and still considers this a suggestion rather than a requirement. She climbed up onto the chair beside her father, the chair with the horse drawing on the table in front of it, and looked at Victoria with the noticing eyes. "Did you see it?" Lily said. "I did," Victoria said. "Did it surprise you?" "Very much." "It surprised me too," Lily said. "When he first showed me, I didn't understand all of it, but he explained the part that matters." Victoria looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his daughter. "What's the part that matters?" Victoria asked. Lily picked up a pencil from the table. She thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. "The part that matters," she said slowly, "is that our house runs on air and water." She looked up. Dad explained it, not exactly air and water, but basically. The fuel cell takes hydrogen, which you can make from water, and turns it into electricity, and the only thing that comes out the other end is water again. She paused. "He said, if we can make it small enough and cheap enough, lots of families can do it. Not just us." And I asked him why that mattered. Why not just have it for us? "And," he said, "because your mom grew up in a house where the electricity bill scared people." The kitchen was very quiet. "It shouldn't scare people," Lily said, with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old who has decided something is true and has not yet learned to hedge. "So, he built it so it wouldn't." Victoria Chin had been in boardrooms and Senate hearings and press conferences and negotiations that had lasted 3 days. She had given the kind of speech that made rooms go quiet. She had heard pitches and proposals and arguments from people who were very good at making things sound important. She had not, until now, heard the whole point of a technology she'd spent 3 years and $200 million on explained by an 8-year-old in 30 seconds in a kitchen in Columbus, Ohio. She looked at Marcus. He was looking at Lily the way parents look at their children, When their children say something that reaches all the way back to the beginning of why the reason underneath all the reasons, the thing that started everything. Your father is right, Victoria said to Lily. Lily looked at her with the direct eyes. Are you going to help? Lily said. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She thought about 11 months, no, 3 years. She thought about the board meeting in 3 months that she'd been dreading. She thought about the legal pad on the table with the structure sketched on it in 2 different kinds of handwriting. She thought about 54% efficiency achieved once for 45 minutes, and 68% running for 63 days in a garage next to a rusty truck. She thought about the things she'd said when she got out of the car. Yes, Victoria Chen said. I'm going to help. The truck is still there. Still rusty. Still the same crack in the passenger window. Still the electrical tape. Still the dented fender. Still the side mirror angled slightly toward the road rather than anything useful. Marcus Webb has given no indication of any plans to address any of this, and the people who know him have stopped expecting him to. The foundation was incorporated 7 months after that Thursday in October. It took longer than anyone hoped, and less time than anyone feared, which is, in Victoria Chen's experience, the most you can ever say about legal structures of that complexity. Martin had said months. It took 5. The board has 7 members, 2 clean energy researchers, an economist who specializes in energy access policy, a community advocate from Columbus who grew up 3 blocks from where Diane grew up, and 3 others. Marcus consults on technical questions. He does not run meetings. Helix Energy Technologies is the first licensed manufacturer. Henderson, the CTO, had spent 4 days in the garage with the unit and called Victoria on the 4th evening and said, with a brevity he did not often achieve, "It's real. It's better than he told you. The first residential units are in production. The price point, under the foundation's licensing terms, came in lower than the internal projections. Marcus had been right about what the technology cost to manufacture, and the internal projections had been built on assumptions that no longer applied. The subsidized unit program launched with the first production run. The first household to receive a subsidized unit was in Columbus, Ohio, a family of 4, single income, 2 kids, an electricity bill that had been, for 11 years, the thing the family budgeted around. Marcus Webb did not attend the installation. He had a soccer game. Victoria Chen did something on the day the foundation was incorporated that she had not planned to do, and did not announce. She went back to Columbus. She parked on the street in front of Marcus Webb's house. She sat in her car for a moment, looking at the truck. Then she got out. Marcus was in the driveway with a cup of coffee, which she was beginning to think was simply where he existed in driveways, with coffee, in a work jacket, looking at things with the eyes of someone who notices everything and performs nothing. "I owe you something," she said. He looked at her. "An apology, a real one, not the one I didn't quite give you in October." She looked at the truck. "I said something that was accurate," Marcus said. "Rude," she said, "and wrong about what it meant." He looked at the truck, then at her. The amused expression was there again, the one she'd first seen in the driveway. The one she'd come to understand was not amusement at her expense, but something more complicated and more generous than that. The expression of a man who finds human beings, their assumptions, their reversals, their willingness to be changed genuinely interesting. "You know what the truck is?" he said. "Tell me." "It's the test," Marcus said. "Not deliberately, I didn't plan it that way, but that's what it turned out to be." He looked at it. "Everyone who comes to this house sees the truck first. Before the garage, before the house, before anything else they see the truck, and they decide. And what they decide in that first moment tells me something." He paused. "You decided loudly." Victoria said nothing. "Most people who decide loudly," Marcus said, can't undo it. They get stuck in it. The decision becomes the thing they're defending. He looked at her. You walked into the garage anyway. A long pause. The truck, Victoria said slowly, is not going to the scrapyard. The truck, Marcus said, is going nowhere. There is a kind of intelligence that shows up on resumes, and in laboratories, and in the kinds of rooms where important decisions get made credentialed, validated, legible. The kind that knows how to be recognized as what it is. And there is another kind, the kind that works in garages, after a child is asleep, solving problems it has no institutional obligation to solve, because the problems are interesting, and the need is real. And the combination of those two things is, for certain people, sufficient reason. Marcus Webb built a hydrogen fuel cell in a garage in Columbus, Ohio, with salvaged parts and 14 months of evenings, not because someone funded it, not because a company needed it, not because a patent attorney told him it was a good idea. He built it because his wife grew up in a house where the electricity bill scared people, and because he had the knowledge to solve that, and the knowledge didn't stop being real just because he'd left Boeing, and because Lily deserved to grow up in a world where fewer families sat at kitchen tables doing the calculation that Claire's family had sat at their kitchen table, doing the monthly calculation, the frightening one, the one that shouldn't have to happen. Victoria Chin came to that street in October to close a client deal. She left with something she hadn't known she was missing, not the technology, though she got that too. Something harder to put in a licensing agreement. Something about why the technology mattered, and who it was for, and the distance between those answers and the ones she'd been carrying. The truck is still in the driveway. The garage is still ordinary from the outside peeling paint on the door. A basketball hoop with a net that has seen better days. A crack in the concrete apron that Lily uses as a starting line for her sprints. And inside, in the space between the ordinary things, something extraordinary runs quietly. 68% efficiency. 63 days, and counting. Made of salvaged parts and evenings, and the specific undefeatable stubbornness of a man who decided that the answer existed and that he was going to find it, not for a board of directors, not for a magazine cover, not for the 312 employees counting on a funding review, but for a little girl's drawing of a horse on a legal pad in a kitchen in Columbus, and for every family that should never have had to be afraid of the electricity bill, and for Diane, always for Diane.